Good to be here. Good to see some familiar faces. First of all, I just want to start by saying, anytime you're asked to return to a place that you helped build, you had a hand in.
$560 million. That's what the Indiana Fever are worth right now. 2 years ago, that number was $90 million. Think about that for a second. A 522% jump in franchise value in under 2 years. And the entire reason that happened, every single dollar of that growth, is wearing number 22 and improvising every possession because nobody in the building designed an offense around her. That is the story, not the win, not the box score. The story is that the most valuable player in women's basketball is playing in a system built for someone who doesn't exist, and the people responsible for fixing it are watching from the front office like it's someone else's problem. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because we cover the Fever, Caitlin Clark, and everything the mainstream sports media glosses over. You're not going to want to miss what's coming next. The number that changes everything. Let's start with the math, because the math tells the whole story before we even get to the basketball. Before the 2024 draft, the Indiana Fever were valued at $90 million. A low-revenue franchise in a mid-market city, playing in a league most casual sports fans barely followed. Then Kelly Krauskopf walked up to the podium and called Caitlin Clark's name, and everything changed. By 2025, that valuation had jumped to $370 million. By 2026, Sportico pegged it at $560 million, making Indiana the third most valuable franchise in the entire WNBA, sitting behind only the Valkyries and the New York Liberty. That is not a coincidence. That is not smart front office work. That is one player, lifting an entire franchise on her back while the front office figures out how to get out of her way. Except they haven't gotten out of her way. They've built a maze and left her to navigate it in real time, every single game, without a map. The Fever sell out Gamebridge Fieldhouse every night because of Caitlin Clark. National broadcast deals got picked up because of Caitlin Clark. Merchandise revenue exploded because of Caitlin Clark. And the offense she's running? It's not built for Caitlin Clark. Not even close. Wednesday night in Los Angeles. The Indiana Fever against the Sparks. On paper, this should have been one of the easier games on Indiana's early schedule. Los Angeles wasn't supposed to be competitive, and Indiana won, sure. They won by 9. But watch the tape, and the margin is almost irrelevant compared to what the basketball actually looked like. Caitlin Clark went 1 for 7 from three-point range. 1, 4, 7. Now before you chalk that up to an off night or a shooting slump, stop and actually watch the possessions. She wasn't getting clean looks. She wasn't coming off screens into space. She wasn't running the kind of sequences that produce rhythm for a perimeter scorer. She was fighting for every inch. LA defenders draped on her before she could even catch the ball. Switches happening before she could read the defense. Every time she came off a screen, there was already a hand in her face. So what did she do? She improvised. She drove the rim. She attacked closeouts. She made 8 of 10 shots inside the arc, and that tells you everything you need to know. A player who averaged 32 points a game at Iowa, by pulling from the logo when defenders gave her an inch, was forced to play entirely inside the paint because the offense had no answers for her from distance. 8 of 10 at the rim in a half-court offense designed to generate open looks for Caitlin Clark. That's not a shooting slump. That's a player creating completely different shots because the system gave her nothing. And she still won the game. But she won it the hard way. The kind of hard way that puts mileage on a body, that wears down a player over a long season, and that eventually costs a franchise at exactly the wrong moment. Kelsey Mitchell scored 23 that night, shooting contested fadeaways, because contested fadeaways are apparently what this offense produces. Aaliyah Boston, who signed the largest total contract in WNBA history this offseason at $6.3 million over 4 years, barely touched the ball in the fourth quarter. The player who cost the most barely participating in the most important moments. The player who generates the most revenue doing someone else's job while the rest of the roster watches. The technical foul that wasn't really about a foul. Here's the moment that made every Fever fan uncomfortable and every analyst suddenly very interested in what's happening in Indianapolis. Halftime buzzer in Los Angeles. Caitlin Clark gets hit with a technical foul. The takes came fast. She lost her composure. She needs to stay focused. It's just a bad habit. But watch the sequence. Actually watch it, because that technical foul wasn't born at halftime. It was building from the opening tip. 2 quarters of LA defenders grabbing her every time she came off a screen. 2 quarters of switching defenses that were already set before she could attack. Her arms were visibly red from contact, not from one foul, from accumulated contact across 20 minutes of basketball. Contact that never got called because it was subtle, because it was consistent, because it was exactly the kind of physicality that breaks a perimeter player's rhythm without ever producing a clean foul. By the time the buzzer went off, the frustration in that technical wasn't really about a miscall. It was about a half of basketball where she'd been asked to be the initiator, the creator, the finisher, and the offensive system all at once, and had gotten nothing clean in return. Not one possession where the offense put her in a spot where she could just catch and shoot. Not one sequence where the defense didn't already know exactly where she was going. That technical foul was the moment a generational talent reached her limit. And instead of asking why she reached that limit, the conversation moved on to whether she should have more composure. That's the wrong conversation. The right conversation is why. In 2 quarters of basketball for the richest growth story in women's sports history, that player couldn't get one clean look she could shoot in rhythm. The biggest contract in WNBA history sitting and used. Let's talk about Aaliyah Boston, because there's a number attached to her name that should have fans asking serious questions. Aaliyah Boston signed the largest total contract in WNBA history this offseason. $6.3 million over 4 years. That's not a number the Indiana Fever handed out casually. That's a statement. That's the front office saying, this player is central to what we're building. That's the message sent to the entire league when that deal was announced. That Indiana was serious, that the roster was being built for the long term, and that Boston was going to be a pillar of this team's identity. And then she barely touched the ball in the 4th quarter against Los Angeles. Think about that contrast for a second. The largest contract in WNBA history. The player who carries that contract on her name. Invisible in the most important minutes of game. The offense that's running? It's not designed to use her. It's not designed to use Mitchell efficiently either. It's not designed to use anyone efficiently because it's not really designed at all. It's Caitlin Clark reading the defense in real time and finding the best available option, which is less a system and more a survival strategy. Here's what makes this particularly frustrating. Caitlin Clark finished that game with 9 assists. 9, which sounds like a great number until you watch how she got them. Every single assist came off improvisation, off broken plays, off moments where the design set collapsed, and she found something out of nothing. That's not an offense working correctly. That's a point guard doing everything. Initiating, reading, creating, distributing, and finishing because the structure demands it. The Fever are paying the largest total contract in WNBA history to a player who isn't in the play calls when it matters. They're also benefiting from $560 million in franchise value built entirely by a player who is doing everyone else's job every night. At some point, someone in that building needs to look at both of those facts at the same time. Go to the comments on any Fever video right now. Open social media. Pull up any Caitlin Clark fan account. The message is everywhere, consistent and loud. Fire Stephanie White. Get a new coach. Get someone who knows how to run a modern offense. Get anyone but the person currently calling plays from the sideline. And here's the part that's almost impossible to say out loud in that fan environment without getting buried. They're not wrong about the problem. They're just wrong about where the problem lives. Stephanie White didn't hire herself. She didn't walk into Indianapolis and hand herself the Indiana Fever head coaching job. She didn't build the roster she's working with or structure the cap that has Mitchell, Boston, and Cunningham eating 60% of it. She didn't design the bench rotation that has had Caitlin Clark logging 40 minutes a night without rest. She didn't make herself the one calling plays for a generational point guard. Kelly Krauskopf did all of that. Krauskopf hired White in late 2024. Krauskopf signed off on the roster construction. Krauskopf watched every game of this season and decided to leave the entire structure in place. When Fever fans scream for a coaching change, they're asking for the foreman to be fired without ever questioning the architect who drew the blueprint, approved the materials, and is still sitting in the building watching the construction wobble. You can fire Stephanie White tomorrow morning. The blueprint doesn't change. The roster doesn't change. The cap structure doesn't change. Clark is still going to be the offense because she's still the best player on the floor and the design still doesn't give her anything to work with. The face changes. The problem stays. Who is Kelly Krauskopf and why that makes this worse? Here's what makes this whole situation genuinely difficult to process. If Kelly Krauskopf didn't know what she was doing, this would be easier to explain. But she absolutely knows what she's doing. That's what makes the current situation a choice, not an accident. Krauskopf built the Indiana Fever front office that won the 2012 WNBA championship. In the same city, in the same building. Lynn Dunn coaching, Tamika Catchings on the floor, and Krauskopf running the basketball operations that assembled the pieces. She's been in this building when it worked at the highest level. After that, she didn't stay still. She moved to NBA operations, spending years running basketball operations for the Indiana Pacers. She knows what a modern front office looks like. She knows what player development requires at an elite level. She knows what offensive philosophy needs to look like when you have a generational playmaker at point guard. Because she's been in those rooms, watched those film sessions, and had those conversations with coaches and players who've done it. She came back to Indianapolis in 2024 because the Fever needed a serious basketball mind for the Caitlin Clark era. This wasn't a hire made out of desperation or nostalgia. This was a deliberate decision to bring in someone who'd seen championship basketball up close and could build around the most exciting prospect women's basketball had ever produced. So when the question becomes, why can't the Indiana Fever build an offense for Caitlin Clark? The answer isn't ignorance. The answer isn't inexperience. The answer isn't a front office that doesn't understand the game. The answer is a set of choices, specific deliberate choices, that have produced a roster and a system that underutilizes every player on it, most of all the one responsible for $560 million in franchise value. That's not confusion. That's something harder to explain. You want to know what an offense built for Caitlin Clark looks like? You've already seen it. You watched it for 4 years at Iowa. You watched it in the Olympics and for Team USA. You watched it in flashes during the early parts of both of her Fever seasons before injuries and system limitations got in the way. It's pace. It's the ball at her hands above the arc. It's read and react sequences where the decision-making happens in real time. Pull from 28 feet if the defender gives her an inch. Drop the pocket pass if the help side collapses. Attack the closeout if the big bites on the ball fake. She averaged 32 points a game her senior year at Iowa running exactly that system. And she didn't break the NCAA's all-time scoring record, men's or women's, by running off pin-down screens and waiting for the ball. She did it with the ball in her hands in transition, at the logo, in the short roll, everywhere. The Fever offense asks her to initiate, read, create, distribute, and finish, but it doesn't give her the freedom to pull at any moment. It doesn't give her clean looks-off movement. It doesn't put her in pace situations where her decision-making in transition can damage a defense before it gets set. It puts her in half-court possessions where the defense is already organized and dares her to create something. She creates something. Every time. But creating something out of nothing in a half-court set against organized defenses, possession after possession, over the course of a full season, that's not sustainable. That's how you exhaust a player. That's how you accumulate small injuries. That's how the mileage builds and the legs start going in the fourth quarter, and a double-digit lead against the Sparks almost evaporates because Indiana can't run a clean possession when LA brings pressure. The system that's worked for Caitlin Clark, the only system that has ever worked for her, has the ball in her hands and trusts her to make the decision. That is not a complicated offensive philosophy. It's not some advanced basketball concept that requires a full rebuild to implement. It's a choice. And right now, it's the choice that's not being made. The window is smaller than it looks. Here's what Fever fans need to understand about urgency. Because the urgency here is real and the timeline isn't infinite. The Fever just barely held off the Los Angeles Sparks, a team that was supposed to be the weakest opponent on Indiana's early schedule. Kelsey Plum nearly completed a fourth-quarter comeback. A comfortable lead almost disappeared because Indiana couldn't execute a clean half-court possession when LA started applying pressure. That is the floor. The Sparks are not a championship-tier team. Wait until Indiana plays a defense that's actually prepared. Wait until a coaching staff has watched the tape, identified which side of the floor the Fever can't run anything on, and comes in with a game plan built specifically to expose it. Wait until somebody actually traps Clark off the catch and dares the rest of the roster to make a play without her creating the shot. The margin for error shrinks dramatically against teams that know what they're doing on the defensive end. And then there's the cap. The trio of Clark, Kelsey Mitchell, and Aaliyah Boston operating under the new collective bargaining agreement salary structure creates real financial pressure over time. The window where you can have all three of those players on the same roster at their current ages in the best years of their careers is not infinite. Every season where the system underperforms is a season you can't get back. Every game where Clark is logging 40 minutes, improvising an offense, is a game adding where to a player who already missed significant time in 2025 with injuries to her right groin and left ankle. This is not a small stakes conversation. This is a franchise that went from $90 million to $560 million in 2 years, and the player responsible for that jump is currently doing more work per possession than any player should be asked to do. The longer that continues, the shorter the window gets. The real question nobody wants to answer. So here's where everything lands, and it's not a complicated question, even if the answer is uncomfortable. Is the Indiana Fever going to design an offense for the player who built them? Caitlin Clark is the reason that franchise is worth $560 million. She's the reason Gainbridge Fieldhouse sells out. She's the reason national broadcasts want Indiana on their schedule. She's the reason that a franchise that was barely a conversation in women's basketball 2 years ago is now a cultural institution. She is the reason any of this is happening. And after all of that, through the sold-out buildings and the franchise valuation jumps and the television deals and the merchandise revenue, she's going 1 for 7 from 3 because the offense doesn't give her rhythm. She's taking technical fouls at halftime because 2 quarters of basketball offered her nothing clean. She's driving into traffic on every possession because the rim is the only thing the system produces. That's not a player failing her team. That is a player being failed by a front office that built around her name without building around her game. And the people capable of changing it, the people who hold the blueprint, who control the roster, who approve the system, they're not pacing the sideline. They're watching from the front office. They have every home game, every practice, every front office meeting to look at what is plainly visible to every single Fever fan who watches the tape. Kelly Krauskopf built a championship here before. She knows what it looks like when the pieces fit. She knows what it looks like when the system serves the player instead of the player serving the system. And she knows the difference between a coaching problem and a design problem because she's been making those distinctions in professional basketball for over 2 decades. The question isn't whether she's capable of making the right call. She clearly is. The question is whether she's going to make it before the window closes, before the injuries accumulate, before the margin for error runs out against teams that are actually built to compete. Caitlin Clark will find a way to win regardless. She always does. She won in Los Angeles going 1 for 7 from 3. She won at Iowa, breaking every record in the history of college basketball. She forces wins in situations where other players would accept losses, and she does it while making everyone around her better and carrying the full weight of a franchise on her back every night. But winning despite the system is not the same as winning because of it. And the Indiana Fever, with $560 million sitting on the table and a generational talent in the building, deserve to find out what it looks like when those 2 things finally line up. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Kelly Krauskopf makes a move, or does this structure stay in place all season? I want to hear what you think. And if this video gave you something to think about, hit that like button and subscribe. We break down everything the Fever, everything Caitlin Clark, and everything the mainstream coverage misses. See you in the next one.